Welcome back to The World This Week. The British government has been trumpeting the aid programme agreed for Somalia at the end of a conference that it hosted in London this week. It comes after the country formed its first permanent government in more than 20 years, although Somalis have not yet got to the ballot box. And while the Foreign Office talks of aid, a substantial amount of the money on offer is going to the military, the police and the prison system. So, is a stable state finally being formed in Somalia, or is the reconstruction process being dominated by foreign interests and leaving out key Somali groups? Here's more.
On Tuesday, Prime Minister David Cameron pledged solidarity with Somalia as he opened a donor conference in London. The summit was seeking pledges to rebuild the East African country, torn apart by 2 decades of civil war. Britain committed £180 million. Cameron co-hosted the conference with Somali President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, the first president to have been elected by MPs in Somalia in over 20 years. Cameron told the conference that the world has a vested interest in making sure Somalia becomes stable.
Now, these challenges are not just issues for Somalia. They matter for Britain too, and for the whole international community. Why? Because when young minds are poisoned by radicalism and they go on to export terrorism and extremism, the security of the whole world, including people here in Britain, is at stake.
Somalia has made progress towards stability over the last year. Piracy round the Horn of Africa has dropped by 80% this year, and last month the UK became the first EU country to reopen an embassy in Somalia.
Progress has defied the skeptics. Somalia has rejoined the world of communities. Under my leadership, we offer the world a legitimate partner you can trust.
But militant group Al-Shabaab still controls large swathes of the country, and violent attacks are frequent. On Sunday, a suicide bomber attacked a convoy carrying Qatari officials, killing at least 8 Somalis. And last month, 35 people died in a large-scale attack on the main courthouse in Mogadishu. There are also several autonomous regions within Somalia, and this has not been reflected in this week's London summit. Semi-independent Somaliland's president declined to attend, and key players like Somali business leaders and traditional elders were excluded from the conference, making some organisations complain that Somali civil society is not being represented. Tomorrow, officials will gather in Washington to discuss a new way of engaging in fragile states by emphasising peace building as an outcome of aid. Somalia is being presented as the model for dealing with a perceived Islamist threat across Africa.
Well, my guests in the studio are Dominik Balthasar, Somali expert at Chatham House, and Duale Yusuf, Foreign Secretary of the Somali Unity Council. Welcome to the programme, both of you. So, how fundamental has the shift been in Somalia in the last year? We heard in the report that the MPs have elected a head of government, but nobody's actually elected the MPs, have they?
That's right. I think over the last year, significant gains have been achieved, especially in the security realm. Important military gains have been made. Piracy has dropped incredibly over the last year.
Why is that? Because this was all stitched together as if there's a kind of stable government and piracy has dropped. But I mean, for a start off, the time frame doesn't work, and by and large, pirates aren't notoriously well known for paying attention to stable government. Exactly.
Well, I'm not suggesting that there's a correlation involved here. I'm just saying that progress has been made over the last year, also in diplomatic means. The Somali government, for the first time in a long time, has been recognized by the United States, by the International Monetary Fund, and other organizations. So progress has been made, but one should not forget that on the ground, there still remains much to be done. Many analysts rightly point out that Al-Shabaab is probably more dormant than defeated. We have issues, as was alluded to in the clip, regarding federal issues, questions of federalism, how a Somali state should look like in the future. And there are political contentions over those questions. So it's not as if there's a complete fresh start, and I mean, there's reason to be optimistic and hopeful, but all of that said, there remain clear challenges on the ground that need to be tackled.
Duale, what do you reckon has changed in the last year? How much has changed?
And to be honest with you, first and foremost, we thank to Islamic Channel who has been facilitated and giving voice for Somali people for the last 7 years. I've been here talking about the true life of Somalia. I mean, nobody cares about when it comes in Somali death. And every day there are a number of people are dying in suicide bombs or lack of food or facilities. And an international community are only concerned about, I mean, David Cameron went before he opened that conference of Somali conference, and he went to one of the Somali restaurants, and he had the first time with the Somali food in one of the Somali restaurants. That was historic. Another thing, some people believe David Cameron is trying to help the Somalians, but the Britain has pledged so many times to give aid to Somalia, and all these pledges haven't seen in Somali ground. What we've seen is only international community is aiding, giving aid for 2 or 3 or 4 million pounds or dollars to Somalia. But when you go into the ground in Mogadishu, you see the human suffering and the scale of deprivation and distress is everywhere. It's not only in Mogadishu, but every part. Also, the Somali soldiers has been ill-equipped. For the last, I think, for the last year or so, for the last 6 months or so, the soldiers hasn't been paid, and also there's no the police also wasn't paid. And that is what the problem on the ground is. But the international community, they're always talking about security. And what we're talking about, how Somalia reconcile themselves before we talk the security. Defeat the Shabab. It has to come reconciliation between Somalia. You see Somaliland is already declared that they will not participate in this conference. And also Puntland the same, and all other parts. What we're doing it.
Just let me ask you a question while you're on that subject. How much of the country would you say is outside this process? Because when you list the parts of the country, that sounds like 1/3 of the country is outside the process.
Yeah, correct. I mean, Somaliland is not in this process, and Al-Shabaab is the other party, you know. And as a Somali Somali Unity Council, what we're trying is to build the bridge that and the opposition groups and the government and Somaliland and Puntland to sit together on one table. That's what we provided. We want, before anybody can do that, Somali themselves, you know, come together and get the proper solution of Somalis. But still, what we don't understand, the West, on one hand, they want saying we want to help to Somali people, and on the other hand, they helping by those who don't want to stable country of Somalia, like Kenyan Ethiopians. Ethiopians has been violating the Somali sovereign for the last 21 years, and David Cameron has been praised what they do in the Ethiopians in Somalia, and that's incorrect, and that's what we feel. We feel really sorry what has been taking place.
Dominik, back in. Dominik, you know, when these aid packages are announced, you know, to ordinary people watching the news bulletin, anything with 6 or 7 noughts behind it sounds like a hell of a lot of money. But in terms of what actually needs to be done in Somalia, was this a significant amount of money or not?
Well, again, a significant amount of money have been announced and have been pledged, but it's not necessarily about the scale of the money, but how that money is being invested. So focusing on security is surely one of the priorities in any state-building project. However, what I myself would have liked to see would have been a greater focus on the economic side of the rebuilding of Somalia, partly because if you don't back up the security gains that have been made as of late, largely through AMISOM forces, if those gains are not being backed up by economic gains, mainly by establishing a productive economy, a productive sector, alleviating the huge amount of unemployment that exists in the country, providing livelihoods to different Somali communities, then the security gains might be short-lived.
Let me ask you a bit about that, because a significant amount of it, maybe 1/3 of it, sounds like to me, is going to the military and the police and the prison system. It's clearly a divided process. So is what's going on here that the West is giving its favoured interlocutors in Somalia enough weight in the state system to try and suppress its opponents?
Coming back to the figures, I think the figure that currently circulates is that about $300 million have been pledged to Somalia. Out of that, more than 2/3 have been pledged to fight future famines, and only, well, the remainder is largely allocated to the security sector, doubling police forces, ensuring salaries for the armed forces are being paid, and as you also touched upon, to establish a security or a rule of law system. Now coming back to the question whether that is what Somalia really needs, I think, as I pointed out already, security is a key challenge. Now, the security that the international community likes to see, namely to counter terrorism and to battle extremism, might be quite distinct from the security that the Somali people on the ground would need to see from the state.
Do you have this concern? Because, you know, the West kind of chooses who it likes in these governments. It directs aid into their hands. This aid will not be seen in those parts that we've just discussed, considerable parts of the society which are outside this process. Is there trouble 2 steps down the road, I guess would be my question.
Yes. If we look back to in 2008 when President Sharif came up into the President Somalia, he was pledged that the international community is donating more than £200 million. And all those money hasn't been seen in Somalia. If the President and Sharif had their money, he can build on a strong an economy, he can build on a strong an army, police, and all security staff. But he was pledged and never been given anything. Just a few coins was given. And that is the biggest problem that the President Hassan now is facing to. Because what he told us, we had last night a conference with the Somali youth. And what he told us, he employed only 3,600 only people. How can they run 3,600 for a country like Somalia who had a war 20 years? You know, there's a lack of jobs. The biggest problem of causes insecurity is about economy. And there's no economy. Nobody's giving. What the Somali people, I mean, as ordinary citizens, what we send to our people, give us much hope and build the country. But what comes international communities, we don't see on the ground. It goes in Ethiopia and Kenya and African Union, who gets 160 million when the Somali soldiers been left over, you know. They got injured, they dying on the ground, they are on the fight. But nobody cares about it. And this is what we talk to the international community. If you want to help the Somalis, give directly any donation to the Somali government. And that it doesn't go straight away. And we don't want a rhetoric, you know. If the Britain or the international community wants Somalia to get the real solution, they let the Somalians to solve their problem. We want to sit together in the capital of Somalia. We don't want to international conference held in international countries. What we want, an international, what do you call the conference for Somali reconciliation, because there were a civil war, and the people still distrust each other. So what we do need is to build a bridge between the community, and that's the only way we can get a better solution for Somali future.
Dominik, I mean, some critics would say, you know, this last year has been referred to as a stable period and so forth. But some people would say, well, there was a stable period before when the Islamic courts were in charge. You might not like them, you might not agree with their approach, but it was a stable period rooted in a certain section of Somali society in which they enjoyed popular support. It just wasn't popular with the West. Do you have any sympathy for that argument?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, there are clear facts that lead to that argument, and it's clear that under the Union of Islamic Courts there was a certain phase of stability. The economy was reviving, there was a certain reign of security. As you say, the measures taken in order to establish that security and enforce that were not always based on human rights, clearly, but there was certainly a period of stability, and that stability was uprooted largely with the renewed intervention of international forces, mainly the Ethiopian, from the side of the Ethiopian government, which complicated matters and actually made matters worse. And I think that's something we can see throughout the history of the last 2 decades, is that international interventions have often increase the problems rather than away with them.
And that intervention, I mean, you've referred to it before. That intervention, it wasn't solely an Ethiopian question, was it?
Ethiopian. We know the Ethiopian are unable to invade other country, but you know, the Western world, especially United States, was supplying everything. And we know the Apaches were hovering in Mogadishu and targeting the resident area was made to the United States, you know, and that is a clear message. And what we do want to now, we don't want a hypocrisy. We want a clear relationship with the Somalis. I mean, United States, the president of Somalia went to Somalia and the United States of America, and he met Barack Obama. And he pledged he wants to support Somalian. But another thing is, still we see Ethiopians are invading and violating the sovereignty of Somalia and creating havoc every day in Somalia. The Kenyans are still holding the territory in the past, and the present now. They're occupying the south of the west of Somalia, which is Kismaya area, or Kismaya land. And this is the problem. What we're saying to the international community, if you want this current government and want the Somali people, let them Somalians decide their future. But we don't want anybody to tell how we're going to run our country.
And that would include a dialogue with Al-Shabaab?
Yes, we want to open the dialogue with the Shabaab because they're the part of the... Now they melted into the community. So you don't know who... The president has told us yesterday, you know. So what we need a proper dialogue with the Somalis. We want to also bring it to the Somaliland to come to the Somali conference inside Somalia. We don't want a conference to be held outside Somalia because we're Somalian. We won't solve our problem as they solve other nations. We pride. I mean, Somalia had no pride at the moment. Our nationality is being destroyed completely. And this president, he will be, you know, running around unless international commit and unless international community commit to support Somalia. It's straightforward. Not only Chad and Chad, but we want a real support, which is just solidarity, to show solidarity. First and foremost, let the Ethiopian not to interfere in Somali affairs, not the Kenyans interfere Somali affairs. That is the only way, that solution, that Somalia can be a better place and secure country. Thank you.
Dominik, we heard Cameron say, and it's said, you know, innumerable times in the press about the threat of extremism, the threat of radicalisation. How serious is that in Somalia? Because it's you know, it's an easy thing to say. In one way, one of the great beauties of international terrorism, as far as mainstream politicians are concerned, is you only have to refer to it. You don't have to actually prove it, let alone give some weight to how much threat there might be. What do you make of it?
Well, clearly there has been a threat, and this has been documented, that there is a threat of radicalism. However, that said, most of the Somali radicalism has been contained within Somalia, right? With the exception of the Uganda bombings, there was no international terrorist act as of yet from part of Al-Shabaab, at least as far as we know it. And analysts clearly point out that the extremist agenda of Al-Shabaab is much more concerned with national issues than with international issues, at least at this point in time.
Another thing I want to point out is young British Somalians has been, you know, criminalized and been made as a terrorist. He's been abducted from Djibouti. He was a young man, grew up in central London, and he was working with the social services. And now he's, I don't know whether Guantanamo or New York. I mean, this is the problem we're facing even in this country. Many people has been forced to work, either you work to the secret services, or you face the consequences that you named you a terrorist. And this is one of the problems. And we want to raise Britain. If they want to help, I mean, they should give us a chance, you know. We want to build our country. We did not come to terrorize in Britain. We have thanked to the British government and the British people. And this suspicion of radicalization that the young Somalian of Britain are going back to Somalia and getting trained and coming back and terror. This is nonsense, you know. It's not correct. If you have any evidence, bring us, talk to us. Don't talk those Kenyans and Ethiopians who want to gain this game of political of Somalia. Those who want to divide Somalia. We want to build it. We can hold our children. We can hold our people. contain and get our process of peacemaking in Somalia. But as long as the foreign intervention is there, the Kenyans blaming us, or the Al-Shabaab is there, they always recruiting young Somalians and they send them back to the United States or Europe. That's nonsense. That's not true. And what Hassan was talking about yesterday, he says there's a lack of economy in Somalia. The people are being blamed, you are Shabab. The young Somalian walking the street in Mogadishu or in Kenya has been blamed, oh, you working with Al-Shabaab. And this is, oppression. We feel oppression, international community has on Somalis. And what we do want to now is to release this oppression and let the Somalian to run their affairs and to come together, inshallah, and build their future. That's what we're asking to the international community, either United States of America or Britain. If David Cameron wanted to do anything for Somalis, we say, please, let us do our country, let's fix our country as everybody wants.
What do you think the strategic aim of the British government is? Because it's putting quite a lot of effort into this. What's the Foreign Office thinking about what it's doing and why it's doing it?
Well, I think, as was expressed by the British government, the concerns of the current of Somalia, the crisis that is currently there, does not only concern the Somali people themselves, but has wider repercussions, either of a regional nature or even international nature. I mean, one of the biggest communities within Britain is the Somali diaspora. And so the British government has an interest in also kind of like trying to seek peace and unity and stability within Somalia, so that also the diaspora can potentially return to Somalia and help rebuild a prosperous country.
Absolutely.
Now, I think you're being slightly unfair towards the British government. I think the British government has put much effort into trying to help Somalia over many years now, has pledged big amounts of money and has signed up to different initiatives. All of that said, I think that there are still a number of shortcomings. Just a few years ago, the New Deal initiative on aid for fragile states was launched, and in the conference that we just had a couple of days ago here in London, I would have hoped that a little bit more space would be given to Somali solutions. The conference, as far as I can tell so far, has been very much driven by outcomes rather than process-driven. It seems as if the negotiating bodies were very fixed on delivering, agreeing on, and discussing particular outcomes that were basically pre-fixed. And not taking sufficient consideration of the process and leaving enough policy space for the Somali government in order to design that process. A state-building process is nothing you can draw up on a chart and then implement. It's an endogenous and organic process that evolves over time, and a government needs to have the space to adjust as it goes along the way, which, for example, can be seen in the case of Somaliland, which basically had its own New Deal 20 years ago. Not everything is perfect in Somaliland. They struggle with their own different set of questions.
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there because we've just run out of time. Thanks to my studio guests, and we will, of course, be following the progress in Somalia, and we hope it will be progress in the months and years to come, and we'll be reporting back to you. So do join us for future editions of The World This Week.